Up to the Mishnah now on the top of Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis. Nashim Moed. Now we're going to see on Chol Moed what we can allow at a funeral, what we will not allow at a funeral. So the first level is Ma'anos. The Gemara is going to ask what that means. English translation is elegy. And that we're going to allow. V'lo metapchos. We're not going to allow this kind of wild clapping as a more profound expression of sadness and mourning. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Hasmuchos lemita metafchos, those who are close to the casket that's being laid to rest, they're allowed to clap. Now, Roshei Chadashim, B'Chanukah, B'Purim, Ma'anos u'metapchos. So Chol Moed is on the highest level. When we go down one level to Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, we're going to loosen it. We're going to extend the license for and include metafchos. But bazel lo mekonos. What we cannot allow, neither on Chol Moed nor on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, is mekonos. Used to have professional mekonos, who were the experts at getting people to cry. And they would recite all sorts of kinos. And this is an intense expression of grief, more intense than chanting some sort of elegy, which was permitted. And it's even more intense than clapping, which was permitted at least on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, and Purim. And mekonos is going to be prohibited. That's too profound of grief. Ezu inui. Now we said ma'anos. So what is ma'anos? What is inui? Shekulam onos kiachas, which means that it's a chorus. It's all of them together. Kino, achas medaberes v'kulam onos acharel. Whereas onos is kulam v'kiachas, kino is one and then kula. So that it's responsive reading, one person speaks, and then all the people afterwards respond. Shenemar, not mistaken, Eicha, let's see. Yirmiyahu. V'limadna b'nosechem nehi v'isha re'usa kina. So we see that there's something called kina, which is isha el re'usa. Aval yasid lava v'omer. This, I think, is in Micha. Let's see if I'm right. No, again, I'm wrong. Yeshayahu Hanavi. Ubila amaves lanetzach u'mocha Hashem Elokim dima me'al kol panim. Or asked my Amor, what was the content of these ma'anos? Amar Rav, vai li azla, vai li chavila. Woe for the going, for the azla, and woe lechavila. Chavila is translated as security. What does that mean? A cry is called a woe, that's vai, and we cry over him because azla. Azla means he's on a one-way journey. He's not going to come back. And vai lechavila, we cry woe because he must repay the security. Now we're talking about the neshama. The neshama is a pikadon. It's a security that's given to the guf. And ultimately, that neshama, the soul of man, has to be returned to its maker. Now, Omar Rava says that these professional mekononos in a city called Shechansiv, were really outstanding. And Rav is going to give us a whole lesson in kinos based on what these ladies would say. First of all, they would say Vaili Azla, Vaili Chavila, which we discussed. They would say something else. Good Garma Mikacha Vinimte Maya Lantich. Cut bone from tooth, bring water to the kettle. So what do we get out of that? This refers to opening of the mouth, where the gap between the jawbone and the upper teeth widens. Bring water to the kettle means that the water leaves the person's mouth, returns to its vessel from which he drank. Wow, it's just the opposite of the normalcy. Oh, he says this describes the reverse of drinking. Instead of flowing down from the vessel to one's mouth, the water moves upwards from the mouth back into the vessel. And the point of this analogy is that when a person dies, the natural course of events are reversed. The Yom Rava, again, the women of that city would declare atuf, to wrap yourself, asu, and cover yourself. Who's he addressing? Ture, the mountains. Debar Romi, very high mountains. Ubar Ravra. And they are being told that you should cover yourselves in honor of a man of greatness and of distinction. Dress in fine clothes, O mountains, for a great person is coming to be buried in you. This is a dirge addressed to the general populace, urging them to attend the funeral. Wrap yourselves in clothing, come in great numbers, such that you'll cover the mountains. Vaita, Omar Rava, Sheisham Zamran, Sheol, Itztala, De Milsa, De Melsa, Lebar Chorin, De Shlimus Vade. The coffin is a robe of fine silk to a free man whose provisions are depleted. Death was welcome to this one time in the past affluent person who became so poor that he lacked food. Provide a coffin and garment of fine silk for this free man whose provisions are depleted. In other words, the deceased did not leave enough money to cover his funeral costs. And the woman of Shechansiv appealed to the people to have compassion on him and provide a coffin and shrouds for him. We discussed yesterday that burying the dead became so expensive that the members of the family would run away. This is an appeal for funds, l'chvod hames, to bury the mess properly when the relatives' provisions are depleted. V'yomar Rava, Sheidish Achziv Omran, Rohit v'nofil amabara v'zuftaz yazif. He runs and falls at the crossing he borrows. So here we're talking about a busy businessman who recently fell on hard times. Now as he crosses over from this world to the next world, he's compelled to borrow to pay for burial shrouds. And this is an appeal to the community on behalf of the poor person. Yom Rava, what else did they say? Achana, our brothers, Achana, Tagore, those who are merchants, Azavdirge, Mibadku. What is Hazabdige Mibadku? He translates here as nests will be searched. He says in place of business, this is a warning to the merchants that their places of business will be examined, will be scrutinized and investigated by heaven when they die to determine, check the cashier and see if they were honest in it. The Amarava, and finally, they said one death, Mosa, Ki Mosa, is like another death, Umar in Chibulaya. Suffering is the interest payment. All deaths are the same as far as the deceased must return its soul to its maker. We can compare it to the payment of a loan. The additional suffering that some people undergo is the interest on the loan. Tanya, we learned to the Bryce Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir would quote a pasuk in Koheles, Tova leches al beis ava, v'leches al beis hamishta. Ad v'achai yitein el libo. What does it mean, achai yitein el libo? What should the living take to his heart? Devarim shall be some matters of death. Think about death. Although there is a school of thought that we don't think about it. The yispad, what does it mean, thinking about death? The yispad yispudie. You should try to be maspid others, because then when you die, they in turn will be maspid you. This is not what you call chesed shalem. The yikbar yikbarune. If you get involved and put yourself out to bury the dead, then when you die, they will bury you. The yitan yatanune. If you'll carry the dead, then they will carry you. The yadil yadlune. If he raises himself for the dead, they will raise themselves for him. He interprets it as if he raises his voice to eulogize the dead, others will raise their voices to eulogize him. According to another tradition, the lo yidal yidlune. If he doesn't raise himself up, they will raise him. What does that mean? If one does not act haughtily, but attends to the dead quietly, he will be raised by heaven. So if he doesn't raise himself up haughtily, then in heaven they will raise him. Techsiv kitov amar lecha aleihena. The pasuk in Mishlei says, do not glorify yourself in the presence of the king. Do not stand in the place of the great, for it is better that it should be said to you, come up here, than you be demoted before the prince. He lost two sons. The four great scholars of that generation came in for Nicham Avelim, and they were none other than Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Lozman Azai, Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Tarfon says to his colleagues, De'u shechacham gadolhu baki ba'gados. And to me, there's a pell. All they could say about Rabbi Shmuel is that he was an expert in Agadah. Okay, fine. Even in Agadah. In other words, he was an expert in halacha and also in agad. So chacham gadol refers to halacha. Make sure that we each give a nicham avelim one by one without cutting each other off. Rabbi Akiva and I'll be the last one. Rabbi Akiva had a certain confidence that his nicham avelim would be, the finale. Also, Rabbi Yishmael v'Yomar. Rabu Avonosov. So, the Menachem are not allowed to speak until first the Avel speaks. So the Avel, Rabbi Yishmael opens up and he says, Rabu Avonosov. He blamed himself that he had these bereavements one after the other. He bothered his teachers the first time and a second time. Twice his teachers, like Rabbi Tarfon, had to come to be menachem him. Nana Rabbi Tarfon v'yoma. We're going to derive a kal v'chomer from Nadav Aviv. In Nadav Aviv it says in Vayikra, Perik Yud V'achechem Kol Beis Yisrael Yivku Es Asreifa. Now, in this entire sugi that we're going to learn about Espedim, what it seems to be is that we're going to focus on the zchus, the merit at the time of the Bisa. What was the merit at the time of Nadav Avihu? Right before they died, it says, "Vayakrivu b'nei Aaron es Hadam Elah." So they were involved in this one single mitzvah of Hakrava. So again, they did many mitzvahs, but we're talking about the mitzvah at the end of the life. And yet it says, V'shikol Beis Yisrael Yivku es Sasrei Fazos. There's great honor and respect in the Hesped for Nadav Avihu who were involved at the end of their lives in one mitzvah. Kach, so too, Bonav Shal Rabbi Shmuel Achas Kam V'Kama. How much more so that they must have many, many mitzvahs and many zechuyos at the end of their life. And how much more so should we therefore give honor to these two children? Nana Rabbi Yossi Agliv Yomer, he's now Rabbi Yossi's turn. Softu lo kol Yisrael v'kavru osa. This is, Yeravam was a terrible Rasha, and now we're talking about his son Evia. And they gave him a great eulogy when he died. Avia ben Yeravam, his father prevented the people of Israel from coming on Aliyah to the Regel because of the split between Malchus, Yehuda, and the rest of the Shvatim. He only did one thing at the end of his life. The pasuk seems to indicate quite clearly in Malachim Aleph that this individual did only one thing. Now, who is this individual? So until now, we were speaking about Avihu, the son. I'm sorry, not Avihu. What was his name? Avia, the son of Yeravam. For a second, I just want to see, are we only talking about Avia now? Okay. Is Banav Shal Rabbi Shmuel Achas Kam. My Dover Tov, Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Chia Bar Pop, two possibilities. Anomer Shabito Mishmarto V'ol Regel, when Yeravam had set up Shomrim that would not allow the people to go on Aliyah to the Regel, because he was afraid that people would see what goes on in the Regel and they may want to get attached to the kingdom of Yehuda, whereas Yeravam was the king of the northern kingdom, which is Yisrael. He was afraid that that might happen. So he set up sentries to prevent the people from making Aliyah to Yerushalayim, and his son Avia removed these sentries. Nene Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Yoma. B'Sholom Tammuz u'b'Misrafos avotzecha Malachim Rishonim asher hoyu l'fnecha kein yisrafu lecha. So now we're talking about Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. And the Pasuk tells us in Yirmiyahu HaNavi that he will die peacefully. And in those days, they had a minhag that they would take the artifact, the last pieces of furniture, of garments, so they would burn it so that no one else would use it because it was designated for the king. And Tzidkiyahu was a perfectly righteous man, but it was one particular deed that he performed near the end of his life that he merited the honorable treatment of his death, like we saw in the pasuk that the personal effects of the king were burnt. The possessions would be burnt so that no commoner would try to use them. Although Kavachomer, Umat Tzidkiyahu Melech Yehuda Shlo Asel Mitzvah Achas. And what was his mitzvah at the end of his life? Again, he was a great tzaddik, but the last mitzvah at the end of his life was that he hauled up Yirmiyahu from the bar. He saved Yirmiyahu's life. Shlo Asel Mitzvah Achas Shehela Yirmiyahu min Atit. And the government cast Yirmiyahu into a pit. They left him there to die. And King Tzidkiyahu heard of Yirmiyahu's plight, and he arranged for his rescue. And therefore, B'Sholom Tammuz is Kach, Bonav Shel Rabbi Shmuel Achas Kama V'Kama. They had so many mitzvahs. Certainly, they deserve the honor. Now, Rabbi Akiva reserved himself to be the last speaker of the last hesped, and then Rabbi Akiva Yomer Bayomahu Yigdala Mispaid B'Yerushalayim Ki Mispaid Hadarimon B'Bikas Megidon. And Zechariah Novi foretells that at the end of days, when Mashiach ben Yosef will die, or maybe the death of the Yetzer Hara, the hesped will be great in Yerushalayim, like the hesped of Hadarimon B'Bikas Megidon. What's that all about? Rav Yosef, L'moli Targume Dahai Krol Aviyadanim HaYonis. Not to talk of Yonasan, I would not know what this pasuk means. That the mourning and the grief, ultimately, right at the time of Mashiach, would be as great as the mourning for a man named Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megidon, Be'idna Hahu Yazke Mispida B'Yushalayim. There'll be a great mourning in Yerushalayim. Kemispida, the Achav. Achav was not a great tzaddik. I mean, at one point maybe he did tshuva, but Achav bar Omri, the Katal Yosei Hadadrimon bar Tavrimon. He was killed. Achav was killed in battle by someone by this complicated name. Who can mispaid the Yoshia bar Amon the Kotoyasi Paro Chagira Bibikas Megiddo. What's the Megiddo here at the end of the pasuk? That's an allusion to the death of Yoshio, the great tzaddik, who was killed by Necho Paro, who led his army through the land of Eretz Yisrael to wage war against Ashur, but Yoshio did not allow the army to go through the land, and there was a confrontation in the valley of Megiddo, and that's where Yoshio was killed. What was the one thing he did at the end of his life? So at the time of the death of Achav, who was killed by that guy, Hadar Drimon, what happened is, even though he was just about to die, he forced himself to stand up in his chariot so that the people of Israel would not see him die, and that would cause them to be overwhelmed by fear. They'll be demoralized and they'll flee. And if an army flees, that could lead to a wholesale slaughter. Is kach banav shel Rabbi Yishmael lachas kama v'kama. Omalei Rava l'Rava bar Mori. I don't understand. Tzivbei b'tzidkiyo. We saw before b'shalom tammuz he will die peacefully. How is Tzidkiyo killed? They blinded him. The Nebuchadnezzar had him blinded. Tziv es einei Tzidkiyo iver. That you call tammuz b'shalom? How do you reconcile that? Omalei Achiyom Rabbi Yochanan. The Meis Nebuchadnezzar b'yama. Right? Nebuchadnezzar took Tzidkiyo and locked him up after he blinded him. But Nebuchadnezzar died before Tzidkiyo died. And had Nebuchadnezzar lived, he would have killed Tzidkiyo. But as a result, Tzidkiyo was actually freed at the end. And he died in peace. The Omar Rabba, the Rabba Bar Mori, Ksivbe, Bioshio, Lachain Hinios Fecha, Alavosecha Vinasafta El Kivrosecha B'Shalom. I will gather you to your forefathers, and you will be gathered to your grave in peace. Uksiv Vayoru Ayorim L'Melch Yoshio. They shot 300 arrows through his body. So how do you reconcile that with Osfa Alavosecha B'Shalom? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Shasol Kivra is Amar Lei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shal Charav Beis Hamikdash B'Yoma, that Yoshio did not witness the destruction of the Mikdash. The Mikdash lasted for 22 years after his death. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Eimenachmim Amenachmim Rakshoyim Lomer Dovrat Yiftach Ovel. First, the Ovel has to speak, as we saw from Eov. Shenemar Achrechein Pasach Eov Piu. First, Eov opened his mouth and Hadar, and then only afterwards, Vayan Alifas Atimani and Alifas spoke. Omer Rabbi Avo, Minayin Lovel Shemesi Barosh. We put the oval at the head of the table. We give cover to the oval in the base oval. Shenemar Evchar Darkom Vashev Rosh Vechkon B'Melech Bagdur Asher Avelim Yenachem. And the word Yenachem is going to be interpreted as referring to the mourner himself. And Evchar Darkom Ve'echev Rosh, he'll sit at the head of the table. So the Gemara asks Yenachem Achrini Mashma that the Menachemim are the ones who are put up on at the head of the table. No. Those who will be comforted, and that's a reference to the Oval. How do we know that the Oval has to be Barosh? Visar Mizrach Sruchim. A pasuk in Amos. Excessive mourning will approach, and Mizrach Nases Sar Lisruchim. The mourner becomes the prince of the exalted one. And therefore they sit him at the head of the table. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to stop. And in the afternoon, we'll finish this up. We'll make a siyum, and tomorrow we'll start Masechet Chagiga. We'll get a one-day jump start on Masechet Chagiga. Okay, then? Have a great day.